Good afternoon and welcome back. We are dealing with the topic Black Economic Empowerment in South Africa. When we go back over where this program came from, we will find that Black Economic Empowerment was the new government's response to the effects of apartheid and the apartheid government's economic policy directed at the populace, primarily black South Africans. It was devastating, it was negative, it was counterproductive, and it was aimed at disempowering black people. When the new government came into power, they needed a program which would develop and bring black South Africans into the mainstream of the economy. So that was the overarching purpose of black economic empowerment in the country. What was the effects? The effect or the effectiveness? The effectiveness of the program was just over 2% of a positive result. What does that mean? That means a resounding failure. Now then, where are or have the fault lines been? Number one, the policy was produced under pressure. Pressure from black communities, pressure from black intellectuals, pressure from partners, organizations, and so on and so forth. But the real-time pressure on the program or the policy was that too much was expected from it. Fault line number two, the policy has never had anybody taking responsibility for its implementation. It was just a policy, and it was left to find its own way. People had to comply with it as a legislated piece, in society. That has not benefited the process. It has not benefited the objectives for which black economic empowerment was founded. Fault line number three, the initiators, that was who government became, because they assumed responsibility for the program. They were found to have had no standing in the economy and no positive credibility within the economy. Because of their negative credibility, the policy failed. And something which was well meant came to nothing. Fault line number four, the initiators, the government who ended up owning black economic empowerment, were proven to have had very limited understanding of the South African business environment and the marketplace. Because they didn't quite understand what they were getting themselves involved in, they ended up failing with something as obvious as black economic empowerment. Now, when one think of policy in any area, anywhere in the world, there is a minimum expectation that when you are going to implement policy in a particular area, that you have some understanding of that area, that you have some understanding of that terrain before you introduce that policy. Government has demonstrated that they knew absolutely nothing about the South African economy, and consequently something as obvious and as simplistic as black economic empowerment failed. It didn't fail because it was a bad policy. It didn't fail because it was a bad idea. It was failed because its implementers, because the people who took ownership of it did not know what they were walking into. Yeah? And so a well-meant and a well-designed, quite frankly, process fell totally and completely flat. A further fact is that government did not quite understand the level of resistance which business had to programs, to corrective programs like black economic empowerment. Now, two things needs to be said. One, government was totally naive. That is obvious, and that has to be admitted too. But number two, government did not quite understand where white corporate business were coming from. And these are the realities. Here is the reality. White business, white corporate South African business, used to be a partner to the apartheid government. Before 1994, they were the overwhelming beneficiaries of economic policy. Economic policy which was implemented in opposition to black South Africans, in opposition to black society. Those policies benefited a white business, corporate business. These people found themselves in a new reality which demanded that they were now regarded as equal citizens. Did not quite work for them. But who else and what else were they before 1994? They were the people who funded apartheid. They were not just the beneficiaries, but they were the initiators. They were the ones who called for the draconian laws which were implemented. The trade union movement before 1994, it was business which called on the riot police and the army and those people who brutalized and assaulted trade unionists and activists. It was business who called for those people. Apartheid responded to businesses' call because those were disruptive measures in the benefits which they derived from apartheid. And so, when 1994 came, and the new order came into play, and a new field was put out where everybody needed to enter, business found themselves as just one additional component in the bigger field. They were not anymore the automatic beneficiaries. Yeah? Now, here is another reality. Apartheid literally came to a halt. Apartheid's de Klerk pretend to have given the impression that he made a decision. Apartheid was bankrupt. But apartheid was bankrupt because business, in many regards, pulled the plug. Business were hoping for for greener pastures in a possible new South African order because of international pressure, because of local pressure, because the writing was on the wall. They were hoping to be in the same position in a post-1994 era as they have been in the era before that. And so when they found themselves in a place different to what they expected, they became the opposition. Yes, there is a so-called official opposition in Parliament, but that opposition is not really effective. That opposition does not really have direction, be it economically, politically, socially, on every level. There is no cohesion and there's no progression. They don't offer anything tangible per se. Does that make them ineffective? Absolutely. They cannot begin to operate on the level of the government. And so a space has been created because of the ineffective of the so-called official opposition. Business found the space. Business found the space. Business has the resources to occupy that space. Business has the depth to occupy that space. And so they stepped into it. And the African National Congress government found themselves an opposition which was as powerful as they were. Although it might be that they are in a different terrain, but they were as powerful, as resourced, and as effective in the economy as the government has been or are in the political terrain. And so you have these two elephants, both playing or coming from a different platform, but elephants nonetheless. And we know the old saying, when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. And in this case, the entire South African society, the entire South African community suffers because these two elephants are having it out. These two elephants are teeing up against each other, and the rest of us are suffering. Now, what does this mean? This means a stalemate. This means that there's no clear-cut winner. This means that there's no single dominant party. Both are very dominant, even though it is in different terrains. But the effect is that the society will not move forward, cannot move forward. The powers at play are simply too powerful. And so, because of their power, because of their headstrongness on both sides, as a society, we will not move and cannot move anywhere. But let's for a moment imagine that one of the two were to give way. Let's imagine, for a moment, imagine that one of the two would yield and allow the other safe passage. Let's look at this objectively from business's perspective. If business were to step aside and allow the political powers that be free rein, what will happen? Here it is. One point. They will simply disappear. They will follow the very same route that the apartheid's national party followed. They will be obliterated. They will become a speck in history. From government's perspective, if government were to step aside and allow the powers, the economic powers that be, free rein, what will happen to them? Objectively speaking, they will follow the same route which ZANU-PF is presently following right now, in that very soon they too would be replaced by the South African version of the MDC. They would forfeit their historic advantage. They will simply die. A classical stalemate, isn't it? Doldrums, isn't it? That is the reality. This is where we found ourselves, or have been finding ourselves for a very long time. Is there a way out? In this program, we think so. We believe that there is. What is that way out? Here it is. Fortunately or unfortunately, it is an operational offering. It is something that has to be done. Yeah? All freedoms come at a cost. Here is the cost. We would have to create a super legislated national business chamber organization. So number one, rule, it has to be legislated. Rule number two, every economic activity in the country would have to be registered with it. Rule number three, it has to receive a ceremonial oversight role or oversight activity from the national presidency, but it must be answerable to the national parliament. Rule number four, it has to have the operational responsibility for national empowerment programs like Black Economic Empowerment, Affirmative Action, and so on. Rule number five, it must design and operate national advancement programs for established business. Let me talk about that for a second or two. There cannot only be benefits on the one side. There cannot be advantages on the one side only. We came into this new order on the basis of negotiations. We came into this new order on the basis of a settlement. Settlements cannot only have one winner. Established business, whether they have supported apartheid or not, whether they have derived overwhelming benefits from apartheid or not, they have to derive benefits from the new order. They are ultimately South African businesses. We cannot only have benefits on the one hand. What are the benefits then of this new super legislated national business chamber organization? Benefit number one, it will reduce corporate tax evasion. And why is that? Because more corporations would feel a part. They will derive a direct benefit from the economy. They will not feel like lepers anymore. So they will contribute to something which they benefit from. Benefit number two of this new super legislated national business chamber organization is that it will take operational ownership of the post-1994 South African economy. Benefit number three, it will finally represent newness in the economy. Thought-provoking? Let us know what you think. But this is our program for today. Thank you very much for having joined us. Thank you for coming along. Hop across to our webpage. There are a few more points there. But your comments is more importantly awaited by us. Let us know what you think. Thank you for joining us and have a pleasant day.